thank you all so much for having me here today, and thank you for the great work that you do at Smart Justice. I know what you do, but I was actually rereading your mission, and that's pretty much what we're all about. And my history is I was a prosecutor for almost 20 years, and then lost my mind and ran for Attorney General, and seriously. And so I've been in the courtroom, and so I really, really appreciate what you do. Drugs in our society are, if you've heard anything I've done, are an obsession for me. And I think it's a horrible, horrible problem. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about some of the things that we're working on, my legislative priorities, some of the things we've done, and some of the things we want to continue to do. And thanks to our great sheriffs out there, our great law enforcement. And I'm blind, but I see Monica Hoffines also from Broward, and Julie Holt, our public defender in Hillsborough County. And thank you all, though. But you know, being a prosecutor for so long, you find out that I am a huge, and I always have been a huge advocate of drug courts. You've got to have drug courts because it's so important. And you know, Julie, some states, they don't all have drug courts yet. So we talk nationally. There are 56 attorneys general. We meet throughout the country, and talk about all these various issues. But drug courts are so very important to keep people out of prison who simply have a drug problem. And you know, you can lock somebody up for drugs, and what are they going to do? Get back out and fall right back into the same routine. And before I even thought about running for Attorney General, it was funny, we had found out that Jacksonville had a reentry program. And I was headed up to look at that on behalf of my office, and then lost my mind again and ran for Attorney General. But now we have reentry programs throughout the state, and they're so very important, because what do? You can lock someone up, and then you say, oh, you know, get out of prison and become a productive member of society. Go get a job. Well, how do people know where to go get an ID card? How do you even know sometimes where to get a driver's license? Who's hiring? Where are you going to live? What are you going to do? So all these reentry programs are also very important and intertwined. Something else that I did along with our legislature that was very important to me, and I worked at Allison DeFore in the back of the room on this, it's called decoupling. And what was happening, we were having convicted felons who would get out of prison and they couldn't get an occupational license because they were a convicted felon. So what we did was we decoupled that issue. So if you have a prior felony, you can still apply to become a massage therapist or get an occupational license, to be a barber, to be a nail tech, or to get a job, unless obviously you embezzled and you want to work at a bank. I mean, you know, that's a different story. But that's what we did. We decoupled that. So that was very important legislation to us. Something else I've been doing is I've been going all over with a young man named Matthew Durrell. It's a wild story, and I sent him to prison. For 20 years, he served 12. He killed 3 of his friends in a horrible one-car accident, drunk driving. I was in my 20s when I sent him to prison. He was 18 or 19. He was you know, high school kid, killed 3 of his best friends, went to prison, horrible, horrible accident. He was drunk, he was on cocaine. He served 12 years, got out, was on house arrest. It was Judge Fleischer, Julie, so you can imagine the setup, you know, the house arrest followed by the probation, followed by this and this and this and this. So he was on supervision, and he needed some adjustment with his ankle bracelet because he was doing construction work. So I was still at the office, and I just happened to come down to court, but I didn't want to see him. I had sent this kid to prison. I'm like, come on, I don't want to be around him, and he certainly doesn't want to be around me. And what he didn't know, the entire time that he was in prison, I was out talking about him to everybody who would listen. Every school, I talked to thousands of kids, anybody who would listen. In fact, the posters of that car that was so destroyed were so frayed, we had to make new ones because I rode around with him in the back of my car and talked about him all over Hillsborough County the whole time he was in prison. So after he got his matter just with his ankle bracelet straightened out, his lawyer came up to me and said, hey, Matt and his mom want to talk to you. And I said, well, what am I going to say to him? I don't know what to say to him. They go, no, he really wants to talk to you. So I talked to him. He hugged me. His mom hugged me. He said, you saved my life. Now we talk together. We are on a statewide speaking circuit, and I think it's extremely compelling. We speak to about 1,200 to 1,500 students at a time. I'm worn out. I'm drinking out of a fire hose, but any school who will have me, I will go, and I will bring Matt Durrell with me. And it's so compelling because I can get up there and I give the same speech that I gave when he was in prison about what happened, and then all of a sudden, and the kids have no idea because he's so well-dressed and he's sitting with my staff, and thank goodness kids don't listen to the news or read the papers, so they don't know that I bring them everywhere with me. So I'll go through my speech and then I'll say, you know what, you guys can hear from me all day long, but why don't you hear from Matt Durrell? You can hear a pin drop in these gymnasiums. And he gets up there and he tells it how it is. He talks about prison. He talks about, and we need more drug treatment in prison, by the way. I do completely believe that. But he talks about, you know, still doing drugs, and he was bad his first few years in prison and getting out, and how he's turned his life around, and he's been sober now, and he's remarkable. And I have had even some of the worst kids come up to me after and say, I will never do this again. I mean, it's incredible the effect that this young man has had. And by the way, I supported him when he had his probation terminated, and he finished his community service hours hundreds of hours ago and is still out speaking with me. We talk all the time, and he's an amazing young man, but that's what it's about. And so I do know the power of an addiction. I saw a very famous baseball player trade his World Series ring for one piece of crack. And he was given the option by a judge to either go back on house arrest and probation and get the drug treatment, or take the prison and give up on himself. And I'll never forget walking over to his defense attorney going, tell him to take the supervision, tell him to take the supervision, because we didn't want him to give up on himself. But he took the prison, and actually I think he's probably doing well now, believe it or not. I think he had some good family support. But so thank you for what you do, and I appreciate that. But it's all tied in: the drug problem, the alcohol problem, and what I'm about to talk to you about, human trafficking. You know, and that's why I was here in Orlando early this morning, because we held our first workshop statewide here, and we're going to make Orlando the really the prototype community, and we're going to take this now statewide is what we want to do. But human trafficking, 4 years ago, if I had talked about human trafficking, you'd all roll your eyes and go, yeah, that doesn't happen. It only happens in the movie Taken, and it's not real. And it's very real. Of the calls in 2011 to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, Florida ranked 3rd in the entire country. So we knew we had to do something about it. 27 million people are enslaved worldwide, and probably they're saying approximately about 2 million of those are in the US. And you think of human trafficking victims as being illegal aliens, and they are just as much a victim, but the majority of them are from right here in our country. They're runaways, they're kids who have been bumped from foster care to foster care, and a lot of them wind up in Florida. And the staggering number that we just learned was that the majority, and this also includes, this is domestic servitude, but it's the sex trade as well. And the majority of these victims in the sex trade, 12 to 14 years old. So we have great state attorneys out there fighting this all over the state, and our U.S. attorneys are great, and we work great with the feds on this, but we needed legislation. We passed legislation. As soon as the governor signed the legislation, it gave my statewide prosecutors the ability to do wiretaps. We went up on a wiretap. We made actually a huge human trafficking case right in the Tampa Bay area, and we will. It was unbelievable. I mean, you know, you'll have a victim, and I've met a lot of these victims now throughout the state and throughout the country, actually, and you'll meet a victim who will have been beaten beyond recognition, taken to an emergency room, and is so scared she'll go right back to her captors. And so we knew we needed more than legislation, so we've partnered with our business community, and that's what, and Bridges of America, they have been so great on this issue. We've partnered with our business community, and they had to become the eyes and ears. We've partnered with the Trucking Association, and where do you take a young girl to traffic her? A truck stop. So we have an online toolkit. You can go to myfloridalegal.com, take it off there, use it for your business. But what we're trying to do, that's what we're doing this morning, we're trying to train our business community to help us, because you have to know the signs to look for. And you know, the truckers are now our eyes and ears. It's really an incredible thing. We've met with the petroleum industry, the convenience stores, because often where are these young girls, the only chance that they're able to get out of the car to go to the bathroom, a convenience store. Hotel, motel industry, met with them because of where they're taken. So it's got to be, we're always brainstorming, we're always thinking, what can we do more to stop this horrific crime? And if you have a business, we can custom tailor anything to fit your business's needs to help us combat this. We would love to do that. We also have an online training for law enforcement, and they've been taking that as well, because you have to know what to look for. This isn't your typical crime, because you'll see, you know, an adult man walk in a business with a young girl, and typically you wouldn't think twice about it, but you have to look at the signs, and that's what we're educating businesses on. If she's withdrawn, if she's looking down, if she's not talking, if it looks like she's under the control of someone else, report it to law enforcement. So we've also come up with a campaign from instant message to instant nightmare. And what we found, a lot of these kids are being recruited on the internet. Just you know, they think they're talking to other 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and they're talking to traffickers. And so we're working with parents. We're going to be in schools. We're working with PTAs. And now, how does this all tie in? What do they do the second that they get these, and I say young girls, but that's the majority of it. What do they do the second they get these victims? What do they do to them? They get them addicted to drugs. That's how they keep them. And so that's why that's so important to us. So what we're looking at now, this session legislatively, is very important to us. What we're looking at legislatively is we need safe houses. And you know, you can take these kids, or a lot of them now are old enough where they've phased out of the foster care system. You can bring them in. You can, you know, law enforcement can interview them. Our prosecutors can interview them. We can make them witnesses. We can try to get them drug treatment. But then where do they go? They're right back on the streets. So that's what we're working on this session, finding them a safe place to live, where they feel safe, where they can get an education, where they can get drug treatment, in an environment where they don't feel like they're going to be brutalized any longer. So we're working on that this year. Pill mills, you know, golly, we had 7 Floridians overdosing a day because of oxycodone abuse in our state. 7 Floridians, I must have said that 1,000 times, by the way, the first session. 7 Floridians overdosing a day, and it had to stop. And our legislature, they worked, this is a team effort, and we all worked and fought very hard to get this legislation passed. Of the top 100 oxycodone dispensers, these are doctors, in the entire country, 98 of them were in Florida. Unreal. So we worked very, very hard with law enforcement. Didn't we? Monica, we worked so hard on that legislation, and now we have, I think, some of the toughest legislation in the country. I moderated a bipartisan congressional committee on drugs, got the chance to meet folks from all over the country, and I've even traveled to Kentucky with Jack Conway, my counterpart there, and I had to hug a mother who lost her child from drugs that were bought in Florida because we had no laws. And it was unbelievable, and they knew that because the dealer still had the plane tickets in his pocket when he was arrested. So now we are cracking down on that. Of those 98 dispensers, we're down to 0. Thank you. And I think the latest statistics just showed, and it was actually more than we thought, that I think we've had like a 52% drop in prescription drug abuse deaths. We still have a long way to go, but that is a significant amount. So I go back and I sit down at my desk and I think, okay, wow, we've got this, and this is really how it happened. We've got this under control. We're working on this, and my phone rang, and it was St. Joseph's Hospital in Tampa, and the neonatology department, and then they said, we have another problem, the babies. Babies are being born addicted to prescription drugs and exposed to prescription drugs, and it has to stop. So I immediately went to St. Joseph's Hospital, and these babies, their blankets are covered because they're sensitive to light, to sound, to touch. Instead of milk, they're getting morphine or methadone. Imagine the TV show, like The Worst Addict you can see on some TV show, Shaking. That's how these babies are. So we knew we had to do something about it. People said, oh, you're trying to take these babies away from their mothers. No, we're not. We're trying to keep them together. And that's what this was all about. I'm not a huge fan of task forces. I think you can study something to death. But we formed a legislative task force because we had to, because we brought everybody to the table. The Nurses Association, the doctors, the treatment providers, law enforcement, DCF, everybody, the neonatologist. And what we did was we completed our task of 3 years in 6 months. And you can go on my line and see the product that we created. And actually, this is a problem throughout the country, neonatal abstinence syndrome. And I've told their 56 attorneys generals, I've told them, I said, hey, go pull our booklet, rip my name off it, put yours on it, and use it in your state. And that's what we do as attorneys general together. We all work so well together. It actually is a great bipartisan effort, believe it or not, throughout. You only hear this tiny, tiny percent that's polarizing and political, but we all work so well together on these issues. And so we're actually out there implementing it. We've seen billboards, we have posters in doctors' offices. We're out there actually training doctors, OBGYNs, and nurses as to what to look for the signs, because often a doctor would ask, are you drinking alcohol, are you taking illegal drugs, and women wouldn't say anything because they were prescription drugs. And one of the things that you can thank our legislature for, last session they gave us, because we put 2 lawmakers on our committee, by the way, and so last session they got to hear firsthand, and they funded $200,000 for pregnant women for beds, for treatment beds, to keep them with their babies. So we're really proud of that as well. So, it's always, I feel like I'm drinking out of a fire hose, and you want to be proactive, but that's all, you want to be proactive, but you have to be reactive. And so I get a letter, when I took this job, I thought I could micromanage an office of 1,400 employees, and I would go home and read letters like this every single night, and I'm reading a letter, and it was from a sheriff, it was from Sheriff McKeithen in Bay County, and he said, we have a problem, synthetic drugs. I'm like, what? I'm reading this going, I don't know what, I was a prosecutor, I didn't know what a synthetic drug was. So I called, in my base, I say Tampa, I started calling law enforcement, and 3.5 years ago, nobody knew what synthetic drugs were. And now look at them, they're everywhere. And I think what happened was Bobby Jindal outlawed them in Louisiana because of Bourbon Street, New Orleans, and all that. So where did they move? The Panhandle. So we had to move fast. It's a hallucinogen, they call it synthetic marijuana, K2, spice, vanilla sky, purple haze. The packaging had like women in bathing, scantily clad women. They were targeting our teens. And so I called the sheriff the next morning. He drove over from the Panhandle. I had 2 Tallahassee FDLE agents go in the Tallahassee Mall, and they bought this junk legally. They tested it, and it was basically synthetic heroin, acid, LSD, out of control. Legally, they bought it. So we knew we had to move fast because they had spring break coming up. One of the side effects, it has psychotic effects, it's a hallucinogenic, you think you can fly. So we had kids in high-rises with synthetic drugs being sold legally all over the Panhandle. So I found out really fast, I didn't even know I had this, people call it a lot of power. With the stroke of a pen, I can sign an emergency order, and I can make something illegal for a year until it goes through session the following year. That's not power, that's responsibility. And the only time I have ever exercised that authority is with synthetic drugs, because we had to stay ahead of these drug dealers. Because what they're doing, it's a billion-dollar business out of Asia. Well, now they're making them here, it's so profitable. And so what they're doing is changing up the compounds. And, it takes a year to catch up with them. And a lot of my counterparts are actually very jealous in their states that they can't do that. They have to wait for session. So what I've done is I've started signing emergency orders to outlaw these compounds. I think I did 22 the first time, 40-something once, 100-something once, to make them illegal. Here's the good news. This last time, I only had to sign 2 compounds, which is huge. And then I did 2 more because they were in Georgia. And that was the crazy clown stuff, it was called. And come to find out, we were able to make an arrest in South Florida because we had outlawed those additional 2. So we are ahead of them. We have outlawed these synthetics, but they're still selling them. Unscrupulous clerks are selling them under the counter at their convenience stores. They are. I met with the petroleum industry, and I said, they're great corporate partners, but I said, you know what? I did a big bust with Sheriff Naco in Pasco County. We did a 2-hour special for Fox News, a national special, all on synthetic drugs. And we went and we did this huge bust, and they were being sold. You could lift up the ice cream, and those you can slide the coolers open in convenience stores. You could lift up where the ice cream was, and just hundreds and hundreds of these synthetic drugs under the ice cream things, everywhere, in the back room, everywhere. So I would encourage you, actually, you can go online and watch that special on Fox News about the synthetic drugs. They also went to California, and they went to New York. The thing that really burns me up, though, and what we're doing is, so I met with the petroleum industry, and I said, they're great corporate partners. I said, listen, that clerk who was selling these, John Doe, his name wasn't on the 6 o'clock news, his face. Your brand was. Your gas station's name was. So we need you to help us monitor the clerks that are selling this junk to our kids. And what we're also doing is we're going in and we're pulling their lottery license and their liquor license if they're caught selling this stuff. So here's the part that really, really burns me up. Well, other than, and I won't get on my soapbox about certain young singers who are now glamorizing Molly's, M-O-L-L-Y-S, Molly's. Do you know what that is? Everybody in here should. It's, they call it ecstasy. It's the purest form of ecstasy laced with synthetic heroin. And in New York, if you watch this Fox special, they had some huge, I think, 3-day concert coming up, and they ended up canceling it because kids died the very first morning from taking the mollies that are being glamorized by these singers now in songs. Miley Cyrus is singing about them, and it's unreal. And when you've got teenagers, they don't get how deadly this stuff can be. So one last thing, and this is my public service announcement, and I take this with me everywhere I go, and this is what burns me up. This is what they're changing. This is how they're changing the packaging. Now, here's what it looks like, Scooby-Doo. If you saw this in your child's backpack, would you think twice? Cotton candy, and this is an empty one, but it's still, I've had this in this Ziploc bag for months. Yeah, I had DEA clean it out for me. I learned the hard way about carrying around the drugs. No, I'm kidding, I'm joking. It still smells like cotton candy. When you touched it, it felt like cotton candy. It looked like cotton candy, like I say, my generation, the old space ice cream. I mean, but if parents saw this, they wouldn't think twice. Just very recently, I was speaking at Moffitt, and I was thanking, it wasn't at Moffitt, it was at a luncheon, thanking, it was a huge group of women for all they do for Moffitt Cancer Center. I went and I sat down. The woman sitting right next to me started shaking and said her child had just come home with that in his backpack. We had a 14-year-old girl, straight A student. Her friends all told her it would help her concentrate. These are kids. Their minds aren't, they're children. A 14-year-old girl, her friends told her it would help her concentrate on exams, like some type of Adderall medicine, whatever. So she, her mom, I assume, stops to get fuel. She goes in the convenience store and buys the stuff, doesn't even try to hide it, sprinkles it on her potato chips during a lunchroom, and goes into a violent seizure. She was one of the lucky ones because she lived. So I can guarantee you no kids at that school are doing this stuff anymore, but they've all heard about it. It's out there. So I would ask you can go on myfloridalegal.com. We have the majority of the pictures of what this junk looks like on our website. Just take it off my website, use it, send it out. Send it to everyone, because people need to see what this stuff looks like and what it does to our kids. So we're doing everything we can to fight the war on drugs, and I appreciate all of our great law enforcement officers and what you're doing, and all of you here today. And thank you for having me. I know I talk way too much. So thank you for having me, and enjoy your summit. And Barney, thank you for the great work that you do at Smart Justice. And where's Allison DeFore, my dear friend, is here too. So thank you. Thank you all very much.